parenting, we're as smooth as bourbon. I'm Lene.
And I'm Jordan. And this is Bourbon and Babies.
Straight up parenting
on the rocks.
All right, we are back. It is Bourbon and Babies time. And we are here with a special guest, Jennifer Sanders, who is a master's level psychologist. And she specializes in postpartum or I'm going to butcher this.
It's okay. It's perinatal. Yeah.
I was there.
Perinatal
mental health.
Yes. Okay, which covers quite the gamut.
Yes.
Which is important. And for our listeners that have been with us for a while, you've heard me talk about postpartum depression and what I dealt with a little bit. But we're really going to dig in tonight and talk about what a lot of moms are dealing with on a regular basis and all of the other things that fall into that category.
So is this going to be like the super happy episode, like the light and bright one?
I mean,
all right,
it's not going to be dark and dank in here.
Well,
it's not going to be dark and dank. There's some funny stuff that comes along with it afterwards.
So it sounds like I'm going to need a cocktail tonight.
You might need a cocktail.
Okay. Good. So tonight we're delving into a Honeycrisp bourbon cocktail, which uses Honeycrisp apples because our children are the apples of our eye. And
wah, wah.
I know. I'm trying here. I'm trying to make connections. Sometimes they work, sometimes not so much. But
I like the cheese.
Thank you. I know you married it. So we're thinly slicing Honeycrisp apples, mainly for garnish. But the cocktail consists of apple cider, 3/4 of a cup. We have some lemon juice, a little squeeze of that, 2.5 tablespoons of maple syrup, a half a packet of granulated sugar, and then my favorite part, 2/3 cup of bourbon. Put those together in a nice shaker, shake it up with some ice, chill it off, pour it over some ice, and use those nice Honeycrisp apples as your garnish. It's light, it's bright.
The first 4 ingredients have me like making a dentist appointment.
Right.
The sugar, the maple syrup, yes. The apples.
Hey, apple a day keeps the doctor away. So you know what? It's kind of, counterintuitive cocktail. But on to our topic at hand.
So speaking of sweet, in one of our recent episodes, I actually talked about prenatal depression.
Okay.
So when I had my first child, it was quite the shocker to be pregnant. We had just moved to Louisville. We had no friends, no family. It was very overwhelming. We were working in a really stressful environment, both of us at the same place. And it was a lot. And then I found out I was pregnant, and we were not planning on being pregnant for a very long time. And it wasn't until, a few months after our daughter was born that a psychiatrist friend of mine, we were chatting about something, and she said, "Hey, I know about this depression study that they're doing at the University of Louisville's Depression Center. And I don't know that you would qualify, but you should check it out because..."
I'm going to need you to stop right there because I was on the staff for that study.
Were you really?
Yes.
That is crazy.
Yeah, sure was.
That's wild.
Yeah, cognitive behavior therapy study.
Kitty?
Yes. Yes, Kitty DeVoe, yeah. Yes.
Whoa.
Yeah.
Worlds collide.
Isn't that crazy?
It is crazy. So
I actually use, this is wild. I use the Good Days Ahead program in my therapy sometimes.
The computer software
program.
Wild. Okay, so now I have to tell them what this is. Okay, so my friend Virginia Evans, she is a dear soul. She suggested this. I didn't find out until later. She clearly saw the signs that I was in it really deep. I didn't think that I was in it really deep. Jordan had said fairly recently at that point, "Hey, you don't seem like yourself." But in my mind, I truly thought, I'm not kidding, these are the thoughts that were in my mind. I thought, what I'm doing is growing up. What I have discovered is that my whole life, I was just really lucky to have gotten where I am. And now I'm finally growing up and realizing that actually this is just who I am, and I have to just accept this the way that it is. And like, the world is kind of shitty. Things kind of suck sometimes.
A lot of moms describe it to me as kind of what they consider to be maybe a normal part of motherhood. I think there's sometimes this thought that, I'm just going to kind of feel that way. It's just part of it.
Right. You have this sweet little baby who's perfectly healthy. You have this adoring husband who's incredible. You have a job. You have a house. Everything is lovely. There's no reason in the world that I should feel as dark as I do. This is just real life. And this is actually how everyone feels. I just never realized it until now, is what was going through my mind.
Yeah.
And I guess in some way I explained this to Virginia, and she suggested the depression study. And so what the depression study is they interviewed people.
Yes.
And on the first interview, they ask you you answer all of these questions, and then they ask you to come back for a second interview, which means that you've made it through the first step. I didn't think anything of this. I called back for the second interview, and I go through the end of the second interview, and the doctor crosses her hands in front of her lap and leans forward and says, well, Lene, it seems that you do qualify for this study because you do have clinical depression. And in that moment, I was both terrified and relieved.
Yeah.
I felt completely overwhelmed by the word depression, but I also felt really relieved because it occurred to me in that moment that this is a thing that actually I can overcome, and that this isn't actually just the way that this life is going to be forever and ever. And so it was so incredibly bittersweet.
Yeah.
And I did go through the program, and it was tremendous, and it made a huge impact on my life. And they connected me with a really great therapist who did such great work with me and finally convinced me to be medicated, because I had gone through all of the process of trying to do it without medication for a year before finally we had to give over. And we can talk about that a little bit later. But that's how I came to the depression study.
Yeah. That's
and
amazing.
You worked on that study.
And I was there. I was one of the interviewers. I was one of those people that did the interviews.
You could have very well been the interviewer.
I could have.
Cognitive behavioral therapy really resonated with me, and it was absolutely, I truly believe, was probably the most pivotal moment in terms of even the transformation that I made in terms of mental health, but also even to the business that I'm in now. I am the coaching business that I do with professional development coaching, and my clients, I oftentimes revert back to that same, what are our thinking patterns, and can we identify those? And it was awesome. Tremendous.
Yeah, good for you. Yeah, that's right on.
I can't believe you're a part of that.
So crazy, right? Such a small world.
So I have to ask,
yes,
because I'm sure other people have the question. I'm not ashamed to admit that I've been faking it for a long time. Can you tell me exactly what is prenatal, or was it perinatal depression or postpartum depression, or what exactly is it? I have an idea, but I've never looked into it, and I know that, Lene has dealt with it, and I've seen what the person is like who's going through it.
Yeah.
But what is the definition of it?
Well, so when we talk about perinatal mental health, we talk about pregnancy through the first year postpartum. So that's the perinatal piece. And that could be perinatal anything. That's just a period. And it can be during pregnancy or postpartum, which is after birth, or it could be both. It doesn't have to be either or, and it doesn't have to be that whole time. There's not really a lot of good kind of research around the time length. A lot of clients will come to me and say, how long is this going to last? And there's really not a lot that I can tell them, except that, I don't know. But with treatment, you can get better. So let me ask you, though, what did you see in Lene that made you go, something's not right?
Lene is a very blunt person.
Let's say direct.
She's very blunt, but she seemed even shorter than usual and getting on me about stuff more easily than she had in the past, and also not as motivated and together as she had been. Yeah. I know she said during pregnancy she became forgetful, and that after our first kid was born, she was like, maybe I guess I'm never going to get those brain cells back. I'm never going to be as sharp as I was before I had a kid.
Which I do think is true. I don't know that I got it completely back.
But
and it's okay.
Yeah.
But she seemed, I don't know, there's some lethargy in there, and it wasn't the same Lene.
She just didn't seem like herself.
Yeah.
And that's oftentimes what both women and partners will say, is that I just don't feel like myself, or, she doesn't seem like herself. So when you think about postpartum or perinatal depression, it's not much different than regular old depression. It is, and we'll talk about that. But in that, it has symptoms like depressed mood or sadness. Irritability certainly manifests, which is kind of what you were talking about with that shortness and kind of getting on you more often. Fatigue or low energy, energy, difficulty concentrating, or lack of attention.
That was a big one for me.
Yeah. What else? Maybe even some suicidal thoughts, even if they're passive kind of what if sort of thoughts, that can happen a lot.
I think hers were more just like fear-based, like what if Jordan never comes back home and I'm left with this kid alone?
Yeah,
how's that gonna work?
Fortunately, I think I'm very fortunate, and I acknowledge this, that I didn't have suicidal thoughts, but I did think regularly about like, what would happen if I just drove the car with all of this in it off of the road? And there was no way I was actually going to do it, but I would go down that path and I would think through exactly all of the things that would happen, even as far as someone would have to cancel our cell phones because, you know what I mean? Like I would go deep.
And that honestly sounds like more postpartum anxiety, which we see a ton of, and we talk about scary thoughts with that, like thoughts of well, let me get through the depression piece first. Postpartum depression is a little different than regular depression. It always is described as darker. It's just there's a lot more isolation, there's a lot more it's a lot lower, it seems, than just kind of your standard depression, if you will. One of the kind of hallmarks is sleep. Usually moms with some sort of postpartum mental health issue, be it depression or anxiety, aren't sleeping well. And if you know anything about having a new baby, it's like all you want to do is sleep, right? So when you lay down and you can't sleep because you're so anxious or because you just, can't get yourself comfortable enough or relaxed enough to sleep, that's a really good indicator that something is going on. There's a lot of factors with having a new baby that are just the perfect storm for that. The hormonal factors, the isolation, especially once partner goes back to work, it's you and that baby. And sometimes you have no clue what you're doing. And there's a lot of isolation with being in the house or not having other mom friends. And, after a few weeks, people stop visiting. And so, it becomes this perfect storm for just feeling really bad about yourself. But yeah, anxiety is another piece where you start to think kind of scary thoughts. The what ifs, what if I'm walking down the stairs and I drop my baby and, they break their neck at the end of the stairs. And it's not that they want to do that. It's, that's a very different thing. Yeah. But it's that thought, that fear. And, women with really severe anxiety can often kind of see that play out in their head. It's very frightening for them. So it's a really interesting beast. And frankly, we don't have a ton of research. We have enough research to know some, and we know good treatment interventions, but it's still very early in what we know about postpartum depression, we call them PMADs, by the way. Postpartum mood and anxiety disorders is what it stands for.
Okay.
So yeah, PMAD. So what we know about them is, basically the standard kind of diagnostic features, and we know how to treat them in a traditional sense of, psychology or therapy. But as far as why they happen, what causes it, we haven't been able to say, oh, well, it's this hormonal fluctuation that happens, or it's, this particular neurotransmitter that makes it different in the perinatal period than in other times.
But one day we will probably know that.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, there's a ton of research, and there's some now, but nothing super conclusive, nothing to say this is exactly what it is. I don't know if you guys saw, but just a couple of weeks ago, there was a big release in the news about a new postpartum depression drug. And so everybody was really excited about that. But again, that too is in the early stages. It was a very small study. It's like a $34,000 IV drug that you have to stay 2 days to receive. It's certainly more for moderate or severe postpartum depression. So it's certainly not, it's not the end all be all, but it is a step in the right direction as they start to kind of narrow down exactly how to treat it.
Yeah. So you, Jennifer, have 3 kids.
I do.
You have a 7-year-old son and you have twin 4-year-old girls.
Yes, indeed.
So you know a little something about this whole pregnancy and the crazy things that it does.
I know a little bit about motherhood.
To your body and brain.
Yes.
How did you get into the work that you're doing now?
So I have been in the field of psychology for a long time. I got my master's in 2006, but even 7 years before that, and then, like a decade after that, I worked with children and families and did a lot of work with low SES, low socioeconomic families. So lots of high crisis, low resources, not a lot of progress. It wasn't something that I really was driven to do, but I was good at it. I had a lot of experience in it. I knew it kind of back and forth, but I just didn't feel really driven by it. And so then I had my son 7 years ago, and I did not have any sort of perinatal depression or anxiety or anything. But what I did do is became involved in a new moms group. And I immediately felt this sense. What I always say is that that there's this hood of motherhood. I really love the hood of motherhood.
I love that.
Because I feel like that no matter where I go in the world, no matter what language we speak, we don't have to speak at all. If I see another mother and she sees me with my children, we have an instant connection that only we know about.
Absolutely.
Doesn't matter where in the world that is. And
that goes with fatherhood too, by the way.
Indeed. Yes.
Thanks, Jordan.
If you and an Aboriginal man see each other far across the world,
you're going to be like, I got you, dude.
Yes.
We're here.
We are fathers. Yes.
How many Aboriginals model? Sorry, I had to go Zoolander.
You can't resist the Zoolander quote.
But hey, you know what? You got to put it in there.
It's all about Aboriginals.
It really is. It's just a really beautiful thing. And even though there's this huge kind of, this phenomenon of mommy wars where there's lots of, who's right and who's wrong about breast or bottle or what diapers or cloth diapers and sleep habits and food and all of this stuff. I mean, when it boils down to it, we are all just trying to do the best for our kids.
Right.
So when I went to this new moms group, I was in a group, and if any of you are listening, love you guys so much. You know exactly who you are. I was in this new moms group, and we were all very different. And there was a yogi in there. There was an architect, there was an engineer, all of these different kind of fields of study, stay-at-home moms, all of these things. But we were all very different in a lot of different ways. We made different choices as far as how we raised our kids, but we were so connected. Because we were all moms and we were all going through the same thing at the same time and could totally relate regardless of some of our choices. And that support was such a beautiful thing, and it just really inspired me. And so I thought, how can I integrate this in my work? I knew there had to be a way, because the other thing I saw is that week after week, more moms were coming for the support, and a lot of us were crying. And it doesn't mean that we necessarily had any sort of mental health issue, but there was clearly a need for support in this realm. And I'm so grateful for the new moms groups in towns, because they really can be such an awesome support.
And finding one that is a non-judgmental, safe space is really hard. I mean, that was a big reason why I wanted to do Bourbon and Babies, because when I looked out across the landscape, you can quickly see those groups and those even podcasts that make you feel judged when you haven't made that same kind of decision. And so we've tried really hard from the beginning on this podcast to explain that what we're talking about are from the perspective of the people that are here. And your journey is different than my journey. Absolutely. And all I want to share is what's worked for me. And if it works for you, great. And if it doesn't, that's cool too.
Absolutely.
But the more we know.
Yeah.
Exactly. As long as everyone's clear that our decisions are the right decisions.
Correct. That's
and
right.
if you do not follow them, you're doing it wrong.
Absolutely. Especially with regard to my children, who are clearly perfect and mentally healthy.
Angels, yes.
Yes. And it's all because I breastfed. No, I'm just kidding. But yeah, no, I agree. I think
as did I.
I think it's super important that that moms kind of that you have to support one another. There's just so much of that. I mean, you see it on social media all the time, kind of that chipping away, these kind of subtle, again, the breast versus bottle, and even what kind of education you give them, and what kind
Don't
of
even
toys.
say the V word. Like, if we have to say vaccination, we...
I thought you were going for vagina. I was very confused, because
that word's totally
that's where a lot of babies
safe.
come from.
They do. They all come from mostly from that place. So,
right.
I mean, not necessarily.
None of mine did.
Yeah, two of mine didn't. So I guess that's not fair to say anyway. But they got there that way, though. Typically,
yeah, for the most part, yeah.
Unless the sperm got lost, I don't know.
Right. This has taken a rather interesting turn.
That's why I'm here.
I don't
what
even
it
know the hell
does.
we were talking about.
How you came to your
I
business.
came to be. Yeah. So after kind of being inspired by the hood of motherhood, I looked into an organization called Postpartum Support International, realized that this perinatal mental health was an actual thing, that there was actual research, which is really important to me, and that I could do something with it. So I got a lot of training. I got a lactation consultant certification, which is by no means a lactation consultant. It's like a counselor certificate. It's like a 40-hour class. But I just wanted just enough knowledge to know, if a breastfeeding mom came in, that I could give her some sort of wisdom or direct her to,
That's super smart.
Yeah. Postpartum doula certification, because I was going to integrate that in the practice. And then I just had this dream of okay, I'm going to start private practice, which I had been in other people's practices, but I really wanted mine and for it to be specialized. it was just, I became super passionate about it for the first time really ever. I'd always loved psychology, but I felt like I finally found my niche. So it was really cool.
I love
that
it.
That is awesome.
That's so great. And it's such an important thing. One, I'm pretty proud that as far as I know, women are starting to talk more about this in some communities. I fully recognize that we live in a little bit of a bubble here in Louisville because we are a pretty forward-thinking liberal town, and there are not a lot of things that are off limits in the public sphere here. But I get that therapy is still something that is very taboo. I'm originally from Mississippi, and I have family members that if you said you should go to therapy, they would laugh in my face. And it's part of the culture. And I felt that way before I went to therapy. I had never been until Virginia suggested the U of L depression study, and actually spoke at one of their fundraising events.
Oh, cool.
I don't know if you were there or not, and the reason I spoke at it is because they felt it was important for you to see that depression isn't something that happens to people who have had these horrible lives necessarily, that it actually happens to everybody. And we're all equally susceptible. Well, I shouldn't say equally susceptible, because I think probably there are some risk factors.
Sure, absolutely.
That are stronger in some, especially SES.
Yes.
Is that right?
Yep.
Socioeconomic status.
But that, even people who are incredibly #blessed as we are can suffer from this kind of thing. So the work you're doing, I just applaud you for getting in this space, because it's so important.
Yeah.
So here's what I want people to leave with today.
Yeah.
I want them to understand, because many of us who have already had kids do tend to reach out and take new moms under our wing. What can we look for? What kinds of signs can we look for? And then what do we say to get them to you or other people like you who can help? Yeah.
There's a lot, actually. And I think one of the stories that I really love to tell is about when I was pregnant with my son. I had a psychologist friend of mine. We were at a conference, and she had already had some kids. And she said to me, which at the time I didn't think was super odd, but I was like, that's an interesting thing to say. One of the things she said to me was, don't be surprised if when they put them on your chest, that there's not this huge overwhelming feeling of love and affection. It's okay if that doesn't happen. And I was like, that's a weird thing to say. And then lo and behold, that didn't really happen for me. Wow. And that's not to say that I didn't love my son. I certainly loved him. But it wasn't this social media thing that you see where it's oh my gosh, how did I ever live without this
instantaneous
baby?
Bond.
Yes.
Love at first sight.
Love at first sight. The skies part. The rainbow comes out. It just wasn't quite right. It took me a while to fall in love with my son. I always loved him. I always cared for him. So one of the things that I think you can do in general for pregnant moms or new moms is to just really normalize their experience, that it is hard, that there's no necessarily right way to feel. It's okay to not like your baby sometimes. They can be real dicks, right?
Right.
They can be real
Not just the babies, all the way up into adulthood. We're all kind of dicks sometimes.
Right. Yeah. I mean, they can be really hard. And so at 3 a.m. when you are feeling, rageful, well, if you're feeling rageful, that's probably not the best. But when you're feeling oh my gosh,
I definitely
this
felt
baby,
a lot of rage.
And that happens.
Take your child. I don't want to shake it.
No, I mean, there were times where I would, in the middle of the night, I would hear our daughter crying, and I would just yell, "Are you kidding me? Just go to sleep."
Right. Yeah, for sure. So I think, again, normalizing the experiencing, letting them know that there's not necessarily a right way to feel, letting them know that you're there if they need help, and that it's okay to ask for help. And that it's kind of okay to feel however they are feeling, because there's not, always this kind of beautiful process. More specifically, again, if they're not sleeping, if you hear them saying, "Oh my gosh, I have," and not because the baby's awake, but if you see them completely exhausted and you go, "Oh, so how, when are you catching up on your sleep?" And they go, "Oh, I'm really not." And you say, "Well, let me come over and, help you out," or whatever. And they can't sleep while you're there, or they can't sleep while their husband is home. Sometimes if there's a stranger, that's one thing, but if they're not sleeping, that's a huge indicator that something else is going on, because you're exhausted, right? So if you can't sleep, then something's definitely going on. Certainly depressed mood. If they're, more down than usual, more withdrawn than usual, just not kind of seeming like themselves. If they're very anxious, they won't let you hold the baby, Within reason. I mean, some people, cold and flu season, I get it. But if they're really super protective of the baby, worried kind of excessively about letting anyone else care for the baby, those sorts of kind of are red flags.
I remember feeling a lot of pressure when people would be like, isn't it amazing?
Yeah.
And I felt like I had to fake it. I would be like, yeah, it's great. And in my mind, I was like, I mean, it's okay.
It's okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, obviously I loved my daughter and I really did. I really did. And I obviously had anxiety around like things happening to her, but I definitely didn't feel that euphoric, like amazing, everything's incredible. I just wasn't there.
Yeah, me too. I mean, reflecting on what you were saying, when the baby comes out in the hospital, I expected that cinematic moment, tears just falling. And I was super happy, and I was just like, oh, this is my daughter. I'm going to love her so much. But like, I didn't feel tears or anything like that. I was happy.
Yeah.
But that was it. So
I was happy she was outside of my body.
but going into our son being born, 5.5 years later, I had no expectations of that. And the second he was pulled out and I saw him, tears just started coming down my face. And I was like,
it was totally different.
It was totally different. And maybe it's that I wasn't as freaked out because I knew that we'd be fine as parents and I could actually enjoy the moment. But it's so weird.
Yeah, yeah.
And then it took me a while afterwards because, I'd been with my daughter for 5.5 years and she's, the apple of my eye and still love her, so much. It was like, I don't know if I like him as much yet.
Sure.
In all honesty, it's like, I don't know if it took me probably...
He really means that.
Like 8-9 months to get to the point where I'm like, you know what? I really do love that kid as much as this other one. Right. But like for the first 8 months, it was like, don't tell your brother, but you're still my favorite.
Yeah. Right. No,
don't tell him. Not that he'll understand.
I always talk about kind of, and I'm no Darwinist by any stretch of the imagination, but I always talk about how, thinking about parenthood and kind of the animalistic nature, us as mammals, and how that looks in the wild is very true, I think, in our homes.
So you ate your children?
I ate a little bit, just a little.
We all want to eat them a little bit.
Yes. That we're taking care of them. We're certainly protecting them. We will bite the heads off somebody that comes at them. But in general, we can kind of do with or without them, perhaps. DNA alone isn't enough to make us fall in love with them. We care for them. We want to protect them. We love them. But that kind of falling in love piece is different, you know, in the same way that we fall in love with friends and our partners and things like that. It is a process sometimes. Not for everyone. I'm not saying that initial love at first sight can't happen, just as it does in our adult lives. Right. That definitely happens for some people.
For some people, that's absolutely a real thing.
Yes.
For others, not so much.
Yeah. And you asked what can we do? I think the other thing that you can do is just check in with your new mom friends. How are you feeling? Asking them straight out. Are you having any thoughts of hurting yourself? Because, postpartum depression leads to suicide more often than we like to talk about. It's always sad and it's so preventable. And so asking them straight out, any thoughts of hurting yourself or any thoughts of, not being here anymore?
I would be curious to know that. I actually have never heard of postpartum depression leading to suicide.
Oh, yes. Postpartum suicide is the second leading cause of death among new mothers.
What?
Yeah. So it's a real thing. And we see, every now and then we'll see a news story about it, but it's not in the news often enough. And sometimes the stories go untold altogether, but it's a real thing. And it's a scary thing. And so I think just checking in with them, how can I help? As opposed to offering help, I'm going to come over and do this. Just ask them, what do you need? They may not want you doing their dishes or doing their laundry or holding the baby, Right. So what do you need? And then just checking in and asking them how they're feeling. But certainly if they just seem a little off or seem a little isolated, overwhelmed, down, depressed, not sleeping, those are all good.
A friend of ours came over to a derby party and her daughter had just been born a couple of weeks before. And as soon as she walked through the door, she was like just hysterical and she really couldn't get it together. And eventually they just ended up leaving. And that was okay, her husband was like, this is the final straw. Like, I'm taking you to the doctor tomorrow.
Yeah.
And sure enough, it was full on postpartum depression.
Yeah.
But I hate that it took that for it to get that far, you know, before you realize it.
I think that's a good point that you bring up, and that's something that I kind of forgot. You know, you've got this huge hormone crash that happens in the first, week or so, where we talk about baby blues. Mm-hmm. And I think that term has become so synonymous with postpartum depression to the detriment of the woman, because they'll tell their moms or tell their aunts or whoever, and they'll go, oh, it's just the baby blues. Well, baby blues is actually a very specific thing that's not depression. It happens with the hormone drop, lasts for a couple of days, and then you bounce back.
Yeah. So hold on. So when you say the baby blues, you mean like on day 3 when we were in the hospital, some like little thing happened and I was like completely crushed and just couldn't I was a hot mess.
Exactly.
That was the hormone crash. That's what baby blues are.
Yes.
And then the lactation consultant making you feel awful.
Well, yeah, the lactation consultant also came in and like straight up pulled my boob out of my shirt, and I was like, I can't with you right now.
Yeah,
Get out of the room.
Well,
my mom was like, I'm gonna need you to leave.
That's another show altogether. How difficult lactation is on postpartum moms.
Well, that's one of the things that I try to set the expectations realistic for people when they're gonna have a baby. I'm like, are you planning to breastfeed? If so, cool. If not, that's cool too. If you are, just know that it's real hard, and you think that because your body is, quote, designed to do this, that it's going to be something natural. And if it's not, that you've done something wrong. And I am here to tell you that it is not something that everyone's body does really naturally, and it sucks for a lot of the time.
Yes. I love that you're telling that to women, because I have that same conversation with women, not in so many words, but just letting them know, because I deal with so many that feel so incredibly guilty that it's not working, and it's really not their fault.
And so how is it treated?
How is depression treated? The postpartum depression?
Yes.
So depression in particular, there's a lot of different ways. The best, frankly, is cognitive behavior therapy. That is, whether it's postpartum depression or regular depression, that is, when we look at the research, has the highest.
Can you explain for our listeners that aren't familiar with this what CBT is?
Yeah, so CBT, Lene kind of mentioned earlier, cognitive behavioral therapy. And what that is really looking at your thoughts. I always give the preface for clients that it's not the power of positive thinking. It's not putting on your rose-colored glasses. It's not having a Pollyanna attitude and, really thinking positive. What it is really looking at your thoughts, thinking about your thinking, and finding those negative thoughts that are driving your negative feelings. So if it's depression, if it's anxiety, if it's guilt, if it's sadness, if it's anger, in those moments that you're feeling that way, what are you thinking? What are you telling yourself? Mm-hmm. Because often what you're telling yourself is illogical, irrational, not reality-based. Mm-hmm. And so it's important to look at those thoughts. One of the most common, for example, would be, I'm not a good enough mom, which is BS, right? And so looking at that thought and looking at the evidence, well, what is it that makes me think I'm not a good enough mom? And how, in fact, am I a great mom? What am I doing that's right?
Yeah.
And really challenging that thought and learning how to replace it with a more realistic and logical thought, and repeat and repeat and repeat. So you're changing that kind of rotation in your head of all the negative thoughts to things that are more kind of logical and rational.
So for me, the real life example for me was, I don't deserve anything I have. Mm-hmm. I don't deserve anything I have. And that was like a constant rotating theme around everything. It was a loop. And I mean, I would catch myself saying the same thing over and over. I would be showering and I would realize I've been saying the same phrase in my brain for so long. And it took learning these CBT techniques to identify that and go, okay, what makes me think that? Okay, well, because I've only ever been lucky, and everything I have is just because something came along at the exact right time. Well, okay, what is the truth behind that? Is there truth behind that? So let me look at the success that I've had in my career, and let me dig in, and let's see if it really has just been luck or if it's been hard work, because truly it was hard work, but it was really easy for me to let that negative festering thought drive all of these other emotions. And so CBT gave me the tools to identify it for what it was and go, that's that one again. That's that little dirty one that's getting to me. And it gave me the tool to be able to change that thought, and I learned different things that I could say in place of that.
Yes, exactly.
And it was incredible. It was truly incredible.
With kids, we call it stinking thinking.
Ooh, I love that.
So anytime, we try to help kids understand their negative thoughts. It's stinking thinking. So that's therapeutically one of the main things that I use. I think also getting some sort of support around a new mom. And that doesn't always include a new moms group. For some, a new moms group is very anxiety provoking.
Yes.
They're sometimes not not in a place where being around other moms is good for them because they're just going to be comparing and contrasting and not feeling comfortable. But for a lot of moms, they do need that support and hearing kind of the normalizing of their experience, being able to look across the circle of women and have them nodding when you're talking, or vice versa, is very powerful to know that you're not alone. Yeah. So I definitely pull in, where are your supports? And if they're lacking, where can we get them? Whether that's more time with family, more time with friends, finding a new mom's group.
Listening to an episode of Bourbon and Babies.
Absolutely. I think that's a great way to connect, right?
I agree. Fantastic.
Self-care is really important, and that doesn't necessarily mean a spa day and, a day of yoga or shopping or whatever. It's whatever that person defines it as. It can honestly be, a shower and a hot meal in those early days. Making sure that you're getting that, making sure that you're getting enough rest. And I get it. I don't expect a new mom to get 8 hours of sleep. I'm not saying that. But there's empirical difference between how our brains react to 4 hours of sleep versus just 5 hours. So even if they can get a good stretch like that, it can make a world of difference. So how can they get out of the house without the baby? How can they get out of the house with the baby and feel confident?
Yeah.
How can they leave the baby with their partner and feel okay with that? Because that's a struggle too sometimes. And by the way, postpartum depression is a real thing for dads as well.
Really?
Yes, indeed.
Tell me more about that.
It happens. It's very under-researched right now. Do you know that it happens to a lot of dads that just don't talk about it? I think mental health in general, dads or men aren't quick to talk about. We know that men are less likely to go to therapy, to seek out treatment for any sort of mental health issues, to even admit that they have a depression is less likely in men. But it's similar in symptoms as far as, feeling down, feeling depressed, maybe not getting as much sleep, increased worry, feeling disconnected, feeling isolated, all of those things.
Is it that post 6 weeks of no sex that's driving it?
I think it's mostly that. Yeah, it's mostly.
That's what keeps me level.
After that OB appointment at 6 weeks, poof.
Suddenly they're back.
Yeah.
Oh, that's what I've been missing.
Yeah. No, it's really Postpartum Support International, by the way, which is their website is postpartumsupport.net. They have some really great resources for dads, and some really great info about postpartum depression in dads.
Postpartum.net.
Yes, that's it. Okay. Yeah.
So what else? Okay, so I am intrigued by, one, I love this perinatal mental health. I love that it includes actually during pregnancy as well, because I did not realize my depression started while I was pregnant. It was very much a part of why it is that I struggled so much during pregnancy.
Yeah.
And I mean, there were days, talk about going down the rabbit hole. There were days that if Jordan didn't answer the phone, even if he didn't call me back within 10 minutes, within that 10 minutes, I would have gone through the checklist of all the things that I now need to do because he's clearly dead. And I mean, I meant it. I was like, I'm calling the cell phone company because we don't need to pay a cell phone bill for someone who's dead now. What?
Yeah.
So intense.
Yes. And scary, right?
Yeah. It was a lot, but I didn't realize until much later that this was something that you could even deal with. Now, listen, being pregnant, you're very hormonal.
Yeah.
But my change most definitely happened while I was pregnant. And another thing that I've experienced that I'm sharing, one, I feel like at the beginning of this episode, the way I should have introduced it is it's not always easy for people to talk about depression and talk about perinatal mental issues because it's a really scary thing. And we worry, oh my gosh.
Like, what are people going to think of me? Like, what are you trying to get
I don't
at?
know. It feels like it's a weakness. So for me, that was one of the scary parts about officially being diagnosed was, oh my gosh, there is something wrong with me. That means that I am weak. And that was part of the reason why I resisted being medicated for so long, because I felt like, no, that is me giving in to this thing. And what does that say about my character?
Yeah.
And
or about me as a mother or a potential mother.
Yes. And my therapist would always bring it back to my child. He would always say, if your daughter were sick, would you tell her to just tough it out or would you let her take medicine? And he tried that for a long time. And then finally, my therapist had this degenerative eye condition. And so when he wasn't wearing his glasses, one of his eyes would sort of go the other way. And one day he took off his glasses and his eyes going this way and his eyes going this way. And he's looking at me and he's going, so I have this condition with my eye. Would you tell me that I should just power through it and not wear glasses, or would you tell me to wear my glasses?
Session, huh? Was that the session?
Yes.
That you made the appointment?
And I was like, please put your glasses back on and go ahead and write me the prescription.
I'm sorry.
Whatever you do,
you talking to me?
Just put your glasses back on.
Are you looking beside you?
Is there someone else in the room?
He was amazing. He was amazing. To this day, I'm so grateful to him. Such a great therapist. But it was one of those moments that like he knew how to work in the humor and the real lesson in it. And it made a huge impact. And he was absolutely right. He put me on medicine that turned the volume down on the anxiety so that I could do the CBT.
Absolutely.
Because the problem was I had the tools, but I was getting really frustrated because I had the tools and I was trying to do it. But in those moments when I was feeling like I was going to snap, I couldn't help but snap because it was all so loud.
Yeah.
But within weeks of being medicated, he was right. The volume was turned down just enough that I had even that breath of a moment before making a snap decision or saying something or reacting to go, oh, this is actually what's happening right now.
Yeah. I mean, Lene, you have such great wisdom that you can really share with potential moms, because some of the things that you're saying, if my clients are listening, they probably have thought that we've talked before, because I tell clients, a lot of them want to know, first of all, they come in and they either want meds or they don't want meds. And sometimes they're in between, but a lot of them are like, I really don't want medication. Are you going to be trying to push for that? And here's what I say, exactly what you just said, which is I usually recommend, I'm not a prescriber, so I refer, but I usually refer for medication in one of two situations. If you are so severely depressed, anxious, whatever, that you can't function, that you can't get to work, you can't take care of your baby, etc. Yeah. Or that we do, because therapy works, I believe it, that's why I do it. If we go through therapy and your symptoms are so severe that you can't do the interventions that I'm teaching you, which is exactly what you just said, then it's time for meds.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, I'm glad to hear that my doctor did the right thing.
They did the right thing. Yes. Yes. And you tell it so beautifully, because that's exactly what it does. It takes the edge off. It takes the edge off just enough so that you can kind of do what you need to do.
Yeah. And see, I was one of those people, and again, I'm sharing this because I know there's people out there that have either thought this or went through it or know someone that's going through it, but I was a fully functioning depressed person.
Yes.
Okay. This was not and this was what I talked about at the U of L depression dinner that I spoke at. It's not like I was the person in the commercials that couldn't get out of bed. Like Jordan said, I was lethargic, but what he was seeing was the lethargy at home in home things. You know, I was still getting all of my work done. I was still being a rock star in all of these other ways. And then I would come home and I would go into this like deep, dark tunnel and not be able to function, but I was still functioning. I was still mothering. I was still eating. I was still doing all the things, but feeling not like myself.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that's true for a lot of women. And I think that sometimes it's intentional and sometimes it's not. Sometimes it's just kind of what you have to do. But I think sometimes they're intentionally trying to like fake it till you make it. Yeah. Because you don't want anyone to know.
It. Yeah. Yes. Yeah. God forbid anyone think that I'm not the badass woman that I've been raised to be. How do they find you?
So I have a website. It's Jennifer L. Sanders LPP, which the LPP stands for Licensed Psychological Practitioner. So JenniferLSandersLPP.com. But yeah, you can find me there. I have a Facebook page too. I will admit it's not super active. I post on there every now and then, cool articles or whatever. But so that's how you find me.
Yeah, it's such an important topic, and let's be mindful of our pregnant friends, and evidently the husbands or fathers, I shouldn't say husbands,
for sure,
the dads, because both moms and dads can evidently deal with this. And
yeah, I mean, I think just keeping an eye out for each other, checking in with your new parent friends, seeing how they're doing. And for new parents, talking to your OBs, talking to your pediatricians either. You usually see the pediatrician before you see your OB again, right? So if you're not feeling quite right, just speaking up and asking for help, because you do not have to suffer. You can get better with treatment, and you are not alone. A lot of women are going through this, and you can get better.
And you want to enjoy motherhood. And so don't suffer.
Yes.
Let yourself be taken care of, because you will enjoy it all the more. I mean, I didn't know it until I had my second. And the second time around, I was able to relish those moments. And I remember being able to just sit and rock my son and be present with him. And that, I really didn't have a lot of that the first time around. And some of that, yes, was just new parenting and am I keeping this thing alive? But some of it too was straight up the postpartum depression. And had I recognize it for what it was, had I had a community of people talking about this and asking more questions, maybe I would have done something sooner. Maybe not.
Yeah.
But would I have had more moments that I could appreciate and relish? Probably.
Yeah.
So with that, thank you all for hanging in there, even though this was a less than
comical,
hilarious episode.
I don't know. I think the vagina talk was pretty good.
I mean, vaginas are always
funny.
Thank
God for that.
Thank God for vaginas.
Thank God for Jordan.
And with that, we conclude our vagina episode.
All right, awesome. Thanks so much. If you need a hood for motherhood, you can join our Facebook group, which is Bourbon and Babies Straight Up Parenting on the Rocks. It is definitely there for moms and dads who don't want to be judged but want to just enjoy the hilarity and chaos that is parenting. So find us on Facebook at Bourbon and Babies Straight Up Parenting on the Rocks. And we'll see you next week.
As always, we love our bourbon, we love our babies, but please drink responsibly. See you next week.